Hello everybody, welcome to Crafty Soup. My name is Misty. I have a Mystery Box Monday video for you today where we dive into this mystery box of supplies, pull out 3 items, and get to work. This time around, we are going to be altering some chipboard to create a title. We are going to play with some watercolor pencils and freehand watercoloring, and we're also going to do a watercolor stamping technique. So let's check it out. All right, I have my mystery box of supplies here. This is a grab bag that I bought from the Peacecraft Love store. She has since switched her store from a lot of physical products to mostly classes and digital products, but I will leave a link for her store in case you want to check her out anyway. And this is a grab bag, so I never know what's going to be inside of here. I reach in and grab 3 things, trying not to let the shape and size and feel of these objects influence me. And this is what I grabbed this time. So this one actually is a packet of several things, and it's a little thank you packet, and I'm going to treat it as one thing and use this as one of my things. And that first one is a cling stamp from Stampendous, I believe it was. If I find links to any of these products anywhere, I will go ahead and link you up to them in case you like these particular products. Most of the time, these are probably discontinued, but not always. Now, that chipboard gather word threw me for a loop for a minute, so I shut off the camera and I started thinking about it. And I'm pretty good at cutting letters apart and repurposing them just because I've had to do that with thickers on my scrapbook pages multiple times. So as I was looking at these letters, the very first word that jumped out at me was cat. Now that was a G, and I'm altering it down by cutting off the descending swoop of the G and then a little bit of the curve of the G, and now it becomes a C, and I can spell cat. And then I was looking at the rest of the letters, trying to figure out if I could use them in any way, and then I got this idea of altering, I think that's an E in there, and turning it into an I, and now I can spell hi cat. And so that totally influenced the project and the story that I'm going to tell, and it is going to be done via watercolor. So I printed out this photo of me and my cat snuggling. He has not sat on my lap much during the whole pandemic because he is very particular about the kinds of fabrics he liked, and he protested when I switched to wearing mostly leggings. And so now he'll only sit on my lap if I have my jeans on or if I've got a blanket on my lap. So that is the story. And as I was chit-chatting, I did pull out some pattern paper from my stash so that I could add a little bit of pop of color to go along with the colorful elements. So there are some like bobby pin enamel embellishments there that I pulled out, the ones that made sense for this story. And there was those little potted flower elements that you'll see a little bit later. So I was going to originally trim off the spiral binding of my watercolor paper. And I was like, why? I have a whole punch in my supplies for creating punch shapes of that shape. So I am going to leave that binding edge on there, and I'm going to use that as an element to do a little more distressing. So I distress the edges all the way around my watercolor paper and my little pattern papers. So I did pull out these little floral embellishments off of the 4-pack because they have colors that match those bobby pin embellishments better. And then it was time to choose my colors, and I have been playing with these distress crayons, just kind of getting to know them lately. So I pulled out this this pack is set 3, and it had enough colors in there that will work with those embellishments that I already have to work with. And the stamp from that first item that I pulled out totally led me to want to do watercoloring, because there is a stamping watercoloring technique that I love to do, and I'm going to show you how. I did stamp an image from that stamp just for reference so that as I'm doing this technique, I have something to look at. And that is because I am going to use these watercolor pencils to color directly to the stamp. And because I can switch between my colored pencils, I can add multiple colors to a single stamp for one stamping pass image. Now, if you don't have watercolor pencils, you can do this with markers. and water-based markers, I should say, not alcohol markers. And this technique will work the same. The important part about this technique is that you do it on watercolor paper, and that's because other papers will just suck in the water and dye the fabrics, the internal fibers of the paper, and that won't give you the movement that you will need to accomplish this technique. So with all of the color applied, I'm going to give, not too close, but a very light misting, and that was actually probably too much misting. 3 to 5 squirts usually is enough of a mist to reactivate any of the pigment that has dried a little bit. And then I pull the reveal and you can see that I've got my image transferred. Now, yes, some of it was too puddly, and that can be controlled a little bit with how much water you use when you spray. And also you may have noticed that I had dipped my pencils directly in a pot of water to use them to color. And that makes them a little bit sticky so that they'll stick to your stamp. Now, this part of the process is optional. You can use a very damp paintbrush to pull the pigment from those stamped lines further into your project. And if some of your lines are too light, you can use that same damp brush to pull pigment straight off the tip of your pencil and add it into areas to create them darker. If some areas are too puddly, you can just use a tissue to kind of soak up those areas a little bit. And part of the reason why I like to do the watercoloring this way is that sometimes when I'm coloring with a pencil on the image, some of my colors will kind of overlap a little bit with other areas. And some of that accidentalness of it makes it more organic. And that is something I struggle with when I'm painting watercolor on my own, is that I get really rigid and kind of color booky, and I forget that mixing our colors and blending our colors and letting some colors flow more and flow less, so we have sharper lines and more blurry lines, that is all the beauty of watercolor. And doing this technique with this stamp helps get my mind into that a little bit more. Okay, but sometimes things get a little too blurry, and my kitty's face got too blurry. So I sopped up as much of the water off of the kitty's face as I could, and then I'm gonna just use that reference image to try and add back a little bit of detail to the kitty's face. Unfortunately, my camera autofocus was focusing on my head the whole time, so I had to scratch that part of the video and finish the watercoloring. But I'm going to show you the close-ups. So here is what the stamps look like when you do the stamp, and on the left is what it looks like once you've added the extra watercoloring step. Now notice I have a sheet of more stamped images. All of these stamped impressions I got off of a single watercoloring session. I did not re-ink that stamp at all, just a fresh spritz of water, and you can pull multiple images. I did clean my stamp just by spritzing it off and wiping it with a towel, and it's good to go for next time. All right, with the image watercolor done, I'm turning to the background with these watercolor crayons. Now, this technique does not work as well with markers, so if you do have markers and you're trying out this technique, what I would do is scribble your marker onto a plastic surface and then pick up that marker with a wet paintbrush in order to use it as paint. Because if you take a marker straight to a watercolor paper, you will be able to get some movement of that color, because that's the nature of watercolor paper, is to allow the water to move and take the pigment with it. But you'll get a lot more impressions of the point of the marker. And that is actually true with watercolor pencils as well. And that's part of why I dip them in water as I'm doing this, because the more they are wet and flowy to begin with, the less of the pressure from pushing the pencil against the paper will embed the pigment into that, that path that the pencil takes across the paper. So dipping pencils in water or using markers off on a plastic palette first will help these colors be more flowy. And I am adding colors here and there. I chose to add 3 areas of red because I work in 3s a lot when I am scrapbooking, to use that design element to my advantage. And then once that background is done and dried, I'm going to add some spatters. And I have this fan brush here. And for spattering with a fan brush, I like kind of a stiff fan brush. And I used to have a fan brush. I couldn't find it. And I went and bought myself a brand new one. And I got a nice stiff one because I think that makes nice spatters. And if you tap your brush against a hard object, like the edge of your pair of scissors, that gives it a sharp stop, which helps the spatters burst off of the end of your brush. So the shape of the brush and that sharp stop gives you a lighter spatter pattern. Hopefully you could see that a little bit in the close-up. I just kind of zoomed past it there. Now everything's dry and I'm starting to assemble, and I realized I wanted a little more contrast around my stamped image. So I shut off the camera and just added some more gray to the background in that area, just so you know. And now I'm going back to altering my chipboard. Now this chipboard isn't like a traditional chipboard. It has some kind of rubbery kind of quality to it. I don't know if it's full paper, if there's something else in there. But anyway, I wasn't sure how things would behave, water would behave on it. So I did use a scrap piece of that chipboard to test out using my watercolor pencils to color over the raw chipboard, and it worked beautifully. So I might look for some more of that brand of chipboard. I may have found a new product to me that I liked, and that's part of the mystery box experience, is trying different techniques, trying different products, and seeing things that I might not ordinarily have done on my own could be really interesting. So that's part of why I do this project, and it's just goofy and fun. That's the other part, just to see what I can come up with. Now, as I was assembling my strip of pattern paper back in there, my paper got too wide because this layout is 8.5 by 11. So I just trimmed off the edge and then re-distressed it, and I didn't lose too much of my pattern from the watercolor, so that's okay. Now that watercolor looks like a hot mess before we start assembling everything, and that's normal with watercolor. I think that's why I like to add spatters, because that helps make it feel more purposeful than accidentally messy, if that makes any sense. So that's one of the reasons why I like to add spatters to my project, because it just hides a lot of imperfections and makes them look purposeful. All right, I have moved on. I got my title in place above my photo, which I did glue down with liquid glue, because watercolor paper, especially once it's started buckling a little bit after it's been wet and dried, can be hard to stick some things to. Now, I really liked the quality of the translucency or partial translucency of the backing to these stickers, and I wanted to use it like a vellum behind my photo, but A, I'd already glued my photo down, and B, it just wasn't working the same. So I ditched that idea, and what I wanted to do with that was to add my little bobby pin embellishments to that vellum, but since that didn't work out, I just stuck them straight on my photo, and I was able to lift the glue just enough to get that to work. Now, I was going to split up my little flower pots to kind of surround my journaling, but because I had to trim off the side of the layout, it made my title not be quite as centered, and my cat embellishment at the top shifted to the left, so I shifted my flower pot embellishments to the right, and then put my journaling off next to that. And my pen did not like to write on top of that pigment from those pencils. So just keep that in mind if you're trying anything like this. Use a pen that's good for mixed media. And then I shut off the camera and was going to take some photos, and I realized I forgot to add my sequins to my project. So I did go ahead and do that off camera, just a couple little sequins here and there to use up the rest of that item from my mystery box. I try to use them all and then finish off this project. So I am very thankful that you spent your time here with me today. Thank you for watching my goofy project. I hope you got some fun ideas out of these watercoloring techniques, because this is something I love to do, and I haven't actually done it in a while. So I will be back later with some more crafty videos for you. Until then, have an artful day.